Today I'm talking about ridiculous injuries from the Netflix movie Extraction. Hey everybody, Dr. Chris, orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine physician. Welcome to my channel, your #1 stop for information on orthopedic injuries and sports medicine that's easy to understand for everybody. And I do mean everybody, including your grandmother. Okay. If you want to know more about my life as an orthopedic surgeon, be sure to follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Stable Knees. I'm also on TikTok at Dr. Raynor. If you're looking for exercises, workouts, or information on injury prevention, be sure to check out our sister channel on YouTube, Human 2.0. And of course, I want everybody to learn about orthopedics and sports medicine. Help me accomplish this task by sharing this video with someone who you think will be interested in this topic. And if you want to be part of the team that helps with the preparation of the videos or the selection of video topics, be sure to check out my Patreon page. That being said, if you appreciate what I do, then subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let's get on with the freaking video. Today I'm going to be talking about injuries from the Netflix movie Extraction, featuring Chris Hemsworth, Rugshaks Jaiswal, and Randeep Hooda. I'll be reviewing random scenes from the movie and giving my perspective from the viewpoint of an orthopedic surgeon. I'll describe the injuries that are most likely to have occurred in these scenes and whether or not these particular scenes are realistic from the orthopedic point of view. Be sure to stick around to the end where I contrast this movie with the action from one of my favorite film franchises, John Wick. This is going to be a spoiler alert because you're going to find out what happens in this movie by watching this video. So go watch that movie first and then come back to watch this video. Otherwise, you have been warned. Okay, so this first injury comes from the first fight scene of the film where Chris Hemsworth character Tyler takes on an entire room of gang members when he attempts to rescue a hostage. While simultaneously fighting 2 gang members, Tyler grabs one gang member and summarily whips him to the floor by his head and his neck. The accompanying sound effects let us know that this ended up with some kind of cervical fracture that immediately incapacitates this gang member. Shortly thereafter, Tyler's attention turns to a gang member who is attempting to rise to his feet from the floor. Tyler notices this and violently kicks a table in the general direction of the gang member. Unfortunately for the gang member, as he is rising to his feet, the sliding table crashes into the front of his head, smacking it backwards into the tiled countertop. The gang member's head is crushed between the tabletop and the counter. And still, during this same fight scene, Tyler is attacked from behind by another gang member who attempts a rear naked choke. He subsequently suplexes this attacker onto the back of his head and neck, causing extreme hyperflexion of his cervical spine. Ouch. All right, so now for the orthopedic analysis. So for this first set of injuries, it appears that the theme is head and neck injuries. The first gang member is stopped when he is handily thrown to the floor. The second gang member has his head crushed between the countertop and the table. Depending upon the force with which the table were kicked, this could result in only a mere concussion, or it could be significantly more serious, causing a skull fracture, an orbital fracture, or even a Lefort facial fracture. Unlike the first gangster who was injured, I wouldn't expect a cervical spine injury with this attacker because the head was crushed between 2 structures and there was little force imparted directly onto the cervical spine. The third attacker, injured during this scene, suffered a forced hyperflexion injury to the cervical spine when he was suplexed backwards onto his head on the concrete floor. The most common fracture mechanism for cervical injuries is hyperflexion, or in other words, excessive flexion where the chin is forced downwards towards the chest. The type of injuries that are possible with a hyperflexion mechanism include an anterior subluxation, a simple wedge fracture, an unstable wedge fracture, a unilateral facet dislocation, bilateral facet dislocation, flexion teardrop fracture, and an anterior atlantoaxial dislocation. And all of these are just different types of cervical spine injuries, none of which are good. But no matter how you put it, None of these three attackers is getting up to fight with Tyler again. So this next series of injuries comes from several scenes where Tyler has rescued the hostage Ovi and is now trying to escape the apartment building in which the gang member's apartment is located. In the first scene, Tyler is fighting with one of the main antagonists, Saju, on the second floor balcony of the apartment building. As Tyler and Saju are fighting, they lose their balance and they fall over the railing of the balcony. They slide down the top of the first floor awning and fall from a height of approximately 8 to 10 feet directly onto the pavement below. Both characters land directly onto their sides on the pavement. After attempting to secure a gun, which has become loose on the ground during the fall, they immediately transition into a knife fight. During this knife fight, they are both lacerated several times by knife strikes. At what appears to be the conclusion of this fight, Tyler, who is standing in the middle of the street, is struck by a passing vehicle and thrown a distance of approximately 5 to 10 feet. Ouch. Saju is able to get up and walk down the street where he is able to secure the hostage Ovi from the Indian police officers in a rather brutal and efficient manner. As Saju walks back down the street to make his escape, a truck, which is ultimately driven by Tyler, summarily smashes Saju, striking him broadside and throwing him through the air approximately 10 to 15 feet. So now for the orthopedic review. First, the fall. Tyler and Saju fall a distance of approximately 8 to 10 feet from the awning onto the ground, directly onto their sides. Neither of them is knocked unconscious, and they both seem to have full use of all four extremities after the fall. Falls from height are generally high energy injuries that are associated with an increased risk of morbidity and mortality. And this just means that falling from a height is bad and can increase your chance of injury or death. I think that it is amazing that neither of these fighters has suffered a head, neck, spine, or extremity fracture as a result of this fall. Although the height was relatively low at only 8 to 10 feet, neither fighter had an opportunity to right themselves in the air prior to making contact with the ground. They both managed to fall directly onto their sides without injuring themselves. This is unusual, since it will require not one, but both fighters to land parallel to the ground in a manner that spread the force of impact over as large a surface area as possible. And that's just because it's better to fall flat onto your side than it is to fall onto an outstretched appendage or your head. However, falling directly onto your side is not foolproof either. This injury mechanism is consistent with injuries that include a shoulder separation, a proximal humerus fracture, that is to say, a fracture where the head of the humerus and the shaft are joined, or a fracture of the glenoid, which is the cup of the shoulder joint. Next, we have Tyler being struck by a vehicle while standing in the middle of the road. Here, Tyler is struck by a relatively small vehicle, a four-door sedan. He is struck in the legs by the bumper, and as his legs are knocked out from underneath himself, he rolls onto the hood and the windshield of the offending vehicle. As the vehicle brakes to a halt, he is subsequently thrown off the hood of the car onto the ground approximately 5 to 10 feet in distance. It is not immediately clear whether he is simply unconscious, badly injured, or even dead. When looking at this collision, there are a number of injuries that we might expect simply from the mechanism of injury. As Tyler is struck first in his legs while standing, we might expect him to have any number of lower extremity fractures. This could include fractures of his ankles, his lower extremities below the knee, including his tibia and fibula, or even his femurs. However, the fun would not stop there. In addition, he may have also suffered a fracture of his pelvis as a result of the impact with the motor vehicle. Given the direction from which he was struck, we would expect this to be a lateral compression type of fracture, where the main pelvic wing was pushed in towards the midline of the body. We might also expect Tyler to have fractures of the upper extremities and neck, as his upper body, head, and neck are whipped onto the hood and the windshield of the car. With the energy of the impact Any one of these fractures might be expected to be open or compound in nature, with the bone protruding through the skin. Fortunately for Tyler, this does not appear to be the case. After this collision, we can see Saju take a moment to assess the lacerations that he has suffered during the knife fight. He has a 10 to 15 centimeter laceration on the dorsal aspect of his forearm, or in other words, the back portion of his forearm. This is where we would expect him to have suffered lacerations during this type of fight. Typically in a fight, one would use the dorsal aspect or the rear aspect of your forearm to fend off slashes with a bladed object. Usually, vital nerves and arteries can be found on the inner aspect of the extremities, where they are less likely to become injured. Also, as this laceration is primarily through muscle in this area, we would generally expect this type of laceration to bleed more slowly as the intramuscular arterioles, or smaller arteries of the muscles, spasm and slow the flow of blood. Finally, we have the pedestrian versus motor vehicle incident where Saju is struck by the truck. Say that 10 times fast. As is the way with action films, if you can go big, then you should probably go bigger. While Tyler was struck by a small commuter vehicle, he steps up the game a notch and decides to drive into Saju at speed with a delivery truck. Yes, that's right, I said a delivery truck. Here, everything that was true when Tyler was struck by the car is true after Saju was struck with the truck, except doubly so. If getting struck by a car is a bad thing, getting struck by a delivery truck is even worse. The next injury comes from the scene where Tyler and Ovi are being pursued by the teenage gang members who are looking for them. During the ensuing fight, Tyler hides in a delivery van, waiting for an opportunity to ambush members of the gang as they pass by the van. As one of the gang members walks by the open sliding door on the side of the van, Tyler grabs his arm and then shuts the door onto the member's outstretched arm. The gang member's arm is crushed in the door at the level of the elbow. This type of injury mechanism could be expected to cause a fracture of the distal humerus, or the end of the upper arm bone, a fracture of the radius or ulna at the level of the elbow, or in other words, the forearm bones, or some type of intra-articular fracture of the elbow itself, meaning that the fracture line extended into the joint, rendering the joint unstable. In addition, because the arm was crushed by a heavy object, we might also expect significant soft tissue trauma as a result of this mechanism. Crush injuries are associated with significant soft tissue trauma that on occasion can cause compartment syndrome in the involved extremity as a result of ongoing soft tissue bleeding. And this just means that the compartments in which the muscle, nerves, and blood vessels are found fill with so much blood that the pressure becomes high enough to stop the further flow of blood into the compartment. And that's usually a bad thing, because if blood can't get into the compartment, then oxygen cannot get into the compartment, and eventually, with enough pressure over a long enough period of time, the muscle, nerves, and blood vessels in the compartment will die. Okay, so the final injury that I'm going to talk about occurs in one of the final scenes of the movie, where Tyler is working across the bridge with his companion Ovi. After securely transporting Ovi across the bridge to the extraction team, Tyler turns back to finish off the remaining police and gang members who are trailing him. Tyler successfully clears the remaining attackers and turns to head back over the bridge, only to be shot in the back of the neck by one of the remaining teen gang members. The round appears to strike Tyler on the left-hand side of his neck in a through and through manner, meaning that the bullet entered and exited out the left-hand side of his neck without becoming lodged in his body. Because the entry and exit wounds are off to one side of the neck, we can assume that many of the vital structures, such as the spine, the spinal cord, the trachea and esophagus, and the main blood vessels of the neck have not been damaged by the traversing round. This assumption is corroborated by the lack of bright red blood flowing from the wound or being expressed from his mouth. Likewise, we do not see Tyler expressing any froth or foam from his mouth, which also suggests that his trachea remains intact. In addition, he is able to continue walking for several steps after being shot, which indicates that he did not suffer a traumatic injury to his spine, his spinal cord, or the nerve roots of his upper or lower extremities. Here, Tyler appears to have been struck with a round from an AK-47 rifle wielded by one of the teenage gang members. The AK-47 rifle uses a 7.62 by 39mm round. Although it is not possible to know which variation of the round was depicted to have been used here, the M43 variant of the 7.62 round is known to be quite stable in flight and even when traversing tissue. It has been reported to yaw or waver in its flight path only after traversing over 26 centimeters of tissue. And this just means that if it hits you, it's likely going straight through. This was one of the main drawbacks of this round, because this tendency for stable flight greatly reduced the wounding effectiveness of this projectile against humans. In other words, this wasn't really a great round to use during wartime because its ability to wound was less than other rounds that were used. If the M43 variant was the projectile that was depicted here, it is possible that Tyler could have been shot in the side of his neck and have only a very small entry and exit wounds. In addition, with this type of round, the amount of soft tissue damage that is associated with this flight path would have been nominal or minimal. That being said, if you watch Extraction, you'll know that this may or may not have been the end of Tyler, depending on what your interpretation of the end of the movie was. At either rate, I would urge you to go and watch this film if you're into this type of action movie. As a side note, I think it's of interest to compare this to one of my favorite franchises that focuses on a similar type of close quarters combat and gunplay, John Wick. Personally, I love the John Wick franchise, both for reasons having to deal with the storyline, but also for my appreciation of the high level of technical skill that Keanu Reeves demonstrates with both his close quarters combat skills and with his gunmanship. Keanu Reeves and his trainers have created a definitive style of close quarters combat which interweaves striking, jiu-jitsu, and gunfighting into its own unique fighting style called gun fu. In this film, I think that Chris Hemsworth has done a fantastic job of portraying his own interpretation of this type of close quarters combat fighting. While I am no expert, I have had some training in both martial arts and in firearms, and I think that Chris Hemsworth did an appreciable job of demonstrating both. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think about the movie Extraction and how Chris Hemsworth did demonstrating these martial skills. And now for my favorite comments from the last video. If you like this video, be sure to let me know and perhaps I'll do a part 2. Or if there's another movie you want me to review, let me know and I'll do that one too. Better yet, let me know who you think is the better fighter, Tyler or John Wick. As always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho.
The flesh wound.